The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees. ACI web sessions are recorded at ACI conventions or other concrete industry events and will be made available for viewing free of charge for 1 week. Thereafter, they will be archived on the ACI website or added to ACI's online CEU program, depending on their content. You can earn continuing education credits through ACI's online CEU program. Visit www.concrete.org to register. ACI conventions provide an opportunity for networking and for keeping up to date with the latest in concrete technology and practices.
Our next speaker is Mark Bloschock. He is with VRX Inc. in Plano, Texas. He works a lot with the North Texas Tollway Authority, and today he's going to present on natural gray concrete surfaces for visual quality and sustainability.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the natural gray concrete today. Again, my name is Mark Bloschock from VRX Incorporated in Plano, Texas. Everybody, when they make a presentation like this, has an agenda or a to-do list. I am from Texas, so I don't have a to-do list. I have a fixing to-do list. And what I'm fixing to do over the next half hour is give you some background in natural gray concrete and look a little bit at a visual quality program that the North Texas Tollway Authority, or NTTA, uses. I'm going to go through some lessons learned, and hopefully there's some questions, some opportunity for some questions and answers. In the way of background on me, I'm retired from the Texas Department of Transportation. I did my career over there at the Bridge Division in Austin, and nowadays I'm a private consultant. This presentation won't have any graphs or charts or any sort of equations. I'm going to go straight to whatever it is that you take away from here will be done in photos. In the way of background for natural gray concrete, I'm going to go to the Lake Alvord Bridge in San Francisco and Golden Gate Park, and you can see that that bridge, done in 1889, is the first reinforced concrete bridge, and it's certainly, in my view, in the U.S., and it certainly, in my view, qualifies as art in concrete. You can see how the faux stone finish was done, and even in a nod to whimsy in the cave for this pedestrian opening, you'll see that there was stalactites and stalagmites done and formed in the walls. We've seen natural gray concrete all over in bridges all over the country and for many, many years. And this one in particular is one that's no longer with us, but it's an Art Deco design done in Illinois, and in particular I like these the daggers that are done in the piers. But somewhere after World War II, and I would say right before the interstate program, workhorse bridges came out, and these workhorse bridges were meant to allow my forefathers in the bridge industry to be able to do many, many bridges as quickly as they can. In fact, thousands of them in Texas, and we have many of them that are this way. And these bridges they serve very well. They were very inexpensive. They built very quickly, and they're very durable. There's nothing wrong with these bridges. One of the things that they did was to coat them. So I want to look a little bit about the history of coatings or paint on our bridges, and you'll see many of them, as this one on I-35 between Dallas and Austin. And you can see that the coating or the paint is starting to peel from the back of the bridge rail. And you can see also on this column happens to be in Austin. It didn't take long for the coating or the paint to start peeling. And it came off in very large sheets, revealing the natural concrete underneath it. And we see that in columns. We see it on our bent caps, other vertical surfaces like retaining walls. We'll also see it on our bridge rails, on the front facing traffic, and on the field side on the back. And you know, these coatings in many cases not really a problem. They can fall off. They can be sandblasted off. There is no money in the maintenance budget to have them recoated. So then we start asking ourselves some questions. Why did we coat in the first place? And one of my mentors, Dr. Jack Breen from the University of Texas, addressed then a TxDOT Bridge Designers Conference in approximately the mid-1990s. He says, TxDOT takes this wonderful maintenance-free material called concrete, and then they paint it. And from that guiding principle, we started to emphasize at TxDOT the use of aesthetics, now called visual quality, in using more and more natural gray, uncolored, or rather uncoated concrete. And I'm going to go through just a couple of slides for some award-winning bridges that were done that were natural gray. This happens to be the Liberty Laurel Bridge in Beaumont. Again, nothing's coated on there. We've done some interesting job of form or geometry in there, along with the color of natural gray concrete. This one is this photo is right off the specification for the segmental bridges for MASHTO, and it is the US 183 segmental design in North Austin. Again, all uncoated natural gray off the form finished concrete. This indeed, the capitals there. This photo appeared on I believe it was ENR to talk about natural gray uncoated concrete with some architectural flair to it. That particular structure did turn out to be quite artistic, even though we may not have meant it in all cases. Even this view here shows use of curves and geometry that, while we may not have intended in the sunlight, really looks nice. The Wichita Falls overhead in Wichita Falls, Texas, you'll see is again uncoated, a lot of nice geometry or form in it. This is my chief designer, Dean Van Landit, standing there to give you a little bit of scale to the bends. The ice axe bends on that same structure that takes the curved steel plate girders down to downtown are shown here. Even on our water crossings in TxDOT, we've gotten away from coating the concrete or painting the concrete, and there's good reason for that. This happens to be Lake Belton in central or kind of in the middle of Texas. And it is one that you don't want to have to recoat. It is a drinking water lake. You can see in the background or to the left the older structure that's being removed, and this, when they were finished, there were twin structures that looked like this. The boaters really get to appreciate, I think, the uncoated finish, but also the water varies. I can't recall exactly, but I think it varies by about 20 to 25 feet in here, based on a warm or a dry or a wet season. So not using coatings there was also a good idea. And just down the road in the Waco district, we'll see the use of texture and off the form finish, again with just a natural gray finish that I think is quite striking. One of my favorite finishes for highway bridges is the rubbed finish. It's very labor intensive and takes a lot of work. I think it helps to cure a lot of ills, and it gives us, when done properly, it gives us a very good maintenance-free finish that I think is appreciated by a lot of folks, including the owners, maybe not the worker who had to do it, but it ends up being, when it's dried out, it ends up being a very uniform finish, as you can see in this particular view of that same structure in North Austin at US 290 and I-35. Many folks will tell us that I'm going to take the little pointer here, that this capital on the top is supposed to look a little bit like the University of Texas Longhorn. I can assure you that was not our intention in any way. And then when we got into some of the artistic work, this was ultimately coated, but you can see some of the 3D work that we did. Pretty commonplace now. At the time, that was the first time that was done. That's me standing there with my artist Mike Ford in Childress as we did this. It was extremely controversial at the time. In fact, there were many people who said that we engineers had just gone too far and that we needed to do something different. But what has happened now is we see that, quite frankly, all over the place. We see that artistic stuff. So let me get into the NTTA, the North Texas Tollway Authority's Special Specifications 850. I think that they do a very good job of coming up with natural gray concrete. So about 4 years ago, when I became a full-time consultant for NTTA, they were in the midst of a pretty good building boom and going to double and more of their lane miles in east and west and north of Dallas in tollways to bring people into Dallas. This is one that is just coming to a close now. It's an interchange at the Dallas North Tollway at State Highway 121, or the Sam Rayburn Tollway. It's just up the DNT, and you can go to see some really well-done concrete by Williams Brothers that does meet the standards for natural gray and for all the things that we were looking in there. So when we had a visual quality program, what were we looking for? Well, first off, we needed to define the goals, and I think that a very good job was done in describing acceptable results. And key words that were used were consistent color, uniform texture, that it would be unvaried and always the same. And then there was also some plenty of results in the field that we saw along the Sam Rayburn Tollway or State Highway 121 where we definitely did achieve that. There were also some unacceptable results that were discussed, and the keywords there were inconsistent or varied or noticeable differences. And these were sort of guiding principles for the contractor and for the landscape architects. And then the one I really liked was visual defects that draw attention to themselves. And you can see on the photo here that a couple of those panels are definitely a different color for whatever reason. It's definitely drawing attention to themselves as you drive down the road. We also worked very closely with the owner to get owner expectations for how we thought that highway contractors were going to deliver the concrete. This is a couple of slides that I use to describe what I say is the difference between craftsman-like work and something else. And this is craftsman-like work on a bridge that goes into a private subdivision, and it's in Florida. And you can see the rail called the Texas Classic Rail, one that was crash tested out of Bridge Division. I'm very familiar with the rail. And you can see a very craftsman-like finish, great attention to detail. It happens to be coated, but the attention to detail in the formwork is just noteworthy, and in fact, it's just stunning. And then right down the road, not very far, is a public works project that it uses the same standard. I can tell you that's the exact same rail. And something else was different there, and that's not a workman-like finish. That's something different and probably doesn't meet the tolerances, but nonetheless, there was some sort of communication breakdown that led to this marked difference between the craftsman-like and then whatever this finish is. So let's look a little bit at the visual quality defects that I've seen and that we point out and that we learn from. Here you can see some difference, a little bit of candy caning, a little bit of difference in color, and it's the difference between the precast coping that is drawn to my eye and then the cast in place. They just really weren't paying very good attention to that, and it's not going to be coated. This is going to be left gray, so we'll end up with definitely some striping in there. Even in our precast retaining walls, although those walls are a little bit damp from the weather, you can see that one of the panels there is bright white, really stands out quite a bit. And precast gives you the opportunity to possibly remove a panel before you start to build on top of it if you're not going to be able to get it to come into compliance. Here I think that we were able to see lift lines that we've seen in the prior presentation, and to me it also looks like there may have even been a change in the mix design. Certainly there wasn't a very good job of vibrating from one lift to another, and there could have possibly have been a water cement ratio change in the concrete as the second load came in. And then when it comes to vibration, we've seen some problems here with probably what results to over vibration. You can see some of the streaking, what we call sand seams. Again, on a finish that was going to be left natural gray, we're trying to avoid this because the patches for this are not very attractive. This was one that was definitely a change in mix design on a cast-in-place wall, and the color for the natural gray concrete is really affected, and it is a defect that really draws attention to itself. We see here, this happens to be back in Austin, and you can see that the post-tension straddle on a cap on the top is definitely a different color than the concrete below, and that's because these are definitely different classes of concrete. Class C for the columns, Class H or higher early strength concrete for the top. And I don't think that was really well taken into account, and also on some of the NTTA projects we're seeing the same things as we saw in Austin, and that you can see that the top post-tensioned straddle is a little bit different color. Once you get the bridge on top of this one and it gets in the shadows, it won't be very evident. But it's something we tried to do with a dye, with a pigment, and I don't think it was entirely successful there. Structurally, everything works out. Formwork is something that we really watch over very carefully, and I think the spec helps to address it. Older formwork that is bumpy and lumpy gives you exactly what it is that you pour it into, and it ends up being fairly ugly. This is one of the NTTA projects, but this is one where the form leaking was really pretty, the form fit up and the leaking was pretty unacceptable. And the fix for that is not going to be anything that's very nice looking either. If we have time, I'll get into this. These are bug holes, and that is coagulation bug holes. Some folks try to dial down the air for this. We didn't find that was successful at all. It has another cause. Hopefully we get some time to discuss that. And you've seen some pictures like this where you have butt joints in the forms. They leak, and we're seeing just some awful stuff, especially if we're going to leave it here. We're not going to coat it. We're not going to rub it. It's going to be a kind of a bad-looking defect that does draw attention to itself. My buddy James is pointing out a chamfer form leakage here that did create some problems. It changes the water-cement ratio around. It changes the color even if it doesn't leak like that. I don't think the forms were taken very good care of. Here at the bottom of this column, of this gantry column, we're seeing some excessive use of form oil down at the bottom. And we know how to deal with that. The contractor and their crews have to be watched over very carefully when it comes to the use of form oil. And this is one that's the classic case happens to be a TxDOT job, but the use of the wrong or overuse of spray-on curing compound. Everybody says that curing compound, after a while it just comes off, and I've seen curing compound stay on for years and years, depending on what kind it was and how thick it was applied. Now, this is not something that's included in our visual quality spec, but it's something that we certainly look for. As you see, this bridge is being constructed, and you can see drips from when the slab was poured. Those are really easy to thwart. In fact, the Florida DOT has a spec where a man will be underneath during the slab pour, and if drips are noticed, they're either sponged off or taken off with low-pressure water, like up in a pump-up spray bottle. Because when you get drips like this, these are not going away. You're not going to rub these off. These are there fairly permanently. Even if they try to sandblast, it doesn't work out all that well. And that is one of those craftsman-like and workman-like features that we work with the contractors. Here, if you notice the slip-formed rail, it has blotches in it, and it has to do with how the rail is brushed and how the brush is dealt with regard to water. When they dip the brush in the water, as they do around the joints like this, they end up affecting the surface, the water-cement ratio of the surface, and they end up getting a different color. So there's some possible solutions to the visual quality defects that we see in our highway bridges. One is that mock-up samples by specification are required. And we've poured, I would hate to think how many cubic yards of mock-ups have been poured, but they're really necessary. I've never seen mock-ups be poured by the contractor correct and beautiful the first time. It helps the contractor understand how their formwork has to be treated, how their form leakage issues come in, and how their rustication strips are done. Helps us to measure the results and work as a kind of a training program one-on-one with the contractor. Also, mock-up samples are required and needed for each class of concrete. You can see in the back of this little yard at TXI some of the precast panels and a little bit of a range of color. And some of these other mock-ups are for the Class H and some of the other concretes that are going to be used on the project. When texture is used, it is absolutely imperative that we get in and do some mock-ups on the texture. It's very difficult to be able to predict what's going to happen with texture, and this one really came out nice once we did the mock-ups. Sandblasting is used to kind of clean things up. I'm not a big proponent of sandblasting. I would rather that we did it kind of right the first time off the form. If there needs to be some cleanup, we'll talk about some other stuff in just a minute. There's the visual quality inspector. You can see in his hand is one can of red paint and one can of green paint. And he's going to judge these for color and uniformity and texture out there in the sun. Some sandblasting is allowed in the field. Once again, it's a destructive process to remove some of the mortar. It can be overdone, and then you can't go backwards. It's not one of my favorite ways to do it, but sometimes you just simply have to do it. And this is one of the cases that the contractor did, well, quite frankly, a sloppy job on this column for NTTA. Sandblasting is allowed, and in this case was even required in the spec. And you can see that there was a pretty good amount of difference that was done. Once again, I'll go back to the work that they were doing there. And sandblasting did help to mitigate some of the ugliness of that particular column. But I think that more attention to detail prior to the pour and during the pour would have resulted in not having to sandblast that. And of course, over sandblasting, in this case, a piece of retaining wall coping, that's a close-up of it. Over sandblasting just took what looked like a fairly good piece of coping and just blew out all the bug holes. Made it look a little bit like Swiss cheese, and it was really kind of nasty. So there had to be something done about some sort of, we won't say a coating, but some sort of rubbing on the surface that would help to fill that in and repair that. So again, the inspectors do inspect the formwork. They take a lot of time to recommend to the contractor, how the formwork should be. especially with reuse. These nice forms that are done, often referred to locally as 850 forms, because the steel is considerably thicker, the fascia steel is. There is the contractors, workers are using a vacuum, a shop vac, to make sure that they pick up all the debris that they're doing in cleaning. They take a lot of care of their forms, as evidenced here. One of the last things that's done is a man goes in there with his stocking feet into the forms using clean rags to wipe it down to make sure that there's not too much form oil on there, to do one last wipe to remove any sort of dirt, dust, or footprints that are in there. And you know, we do end up with some visual quality successes. We have to be prepared to talk about those, and they do show up every once in a while. A piece of concrete that just came out and looked nice, and we got to be able to work with the contractor and tell the contractor, you know, way to go. And we do a little bit of recognition programs. This was kind of one of those innovative things that wasn't required. The contractor used that visqueen, or like saran wrap, around the column, because we're going to be pouring a rail, we're going to be pouring some riprap back there, and it keeps from splashing the grout up on the column. And you want to be able to tell your contractor, you know, way to go. You've spent a little bit of time and you've really achieved that better. You ended up with a look that did kind of meet the standards for uniformity and consistency, and it was something that we all could walk away from and be proud of. This is one from on the San Rayburn Tollway, an unretouched photo that just shows where they really were able to pull consistent color within the elements. That is, we allowed the coping to be lighter, even though they were both cast in the same factory with the same, or same plant with the same concrete. One was cast against rubber forms, and one was cast against steel forms, and ended up with a different color. But once again, I think it turned out really, really nicely. Even our cast-in-place concrete on some of our gantries for the NTTA really turned out about as nice, I think, as you can get the concrete to come out when we're using some of our really good highway contractors. Some of the lessons learned that I gleaned from about 2 years full-time and about 2 years part-time in visual quality is that you're going to get up early in the morning, you're going to spend some time looking at things and looking at stuff that is going to you know, kind of strain your eyes a little bit. You're going to be a little bit close to some things, and maybe sometimes you get too close when you're looking at it. We do judge things from 30 feet. We try to be fair, or judge it from where the people are going to see it, and sometimes that's more than 30 feet. We've seen some stuff like form oil or something happening on these precast elements, and we went in there to put them up there. Sometimes they're sandblasted, but once again, that's a destructive process. In this case, they use a random orbital sander to go in there and sand that, and those same pieces that looked kind of oily came out looking quite nicely. Not spending too much time, but the man went in there and did a random orbit sanding, and they were ready to be placed. Handling of the precast elements is critical. A lot of times things are padded to make sure they're not scuffed up or chipped or whatever. But you can see this panel in the middle of the photo has some staining on it, and the clays around here are you know, monstrously expansive. But more than that, just by being a clay, it has very, very small particles. If not handled, if set down in the mud, or if water, rainwater and dirt are allowed to splash on it, these small clay particles are going to get into the concrete, and they will not blast out either by water or sandblast. It will be stained. Sometimes it looks like just mishandling, and I'm not really sure. You can see in the background everything looks like it's blocked up very well. Indeed, these were blocked up too, but the clays out there, after some rain, the blocking just sank into the especially when they're stacked 2 or 3 or 4 high. Just sank right into the clay. So enough blocking. One of the lessons we learned is you better put enough blocking down there at the bottom. The blocking that you have between panels is not really going to be sufficient. And I think the prior presentation talked a little bit about what we called here rust stone. And you're going to get the rust stone, this ferrous stain every once in a while that's going to appear at the surface. The idea is to be able to figure out a repair method to get in there and be able to deal with it. We tried. There's really no way to get that aggregate when it does occur on these precast or cast-in-place elements. Slipform rail, we learned some stuff. Slipform rail, sometimes it's being poured during the heat of summer, and last summer was a monstrously hot summer. These guys doing the best they can to keep out of the sun, but as the slipform rail is poured, we have a 95-degree maximum, but you know, it eats up water very quickly when it's at 95 degrees, and we end up with these sloughs, and that whole area then has to come out. It'd be better to pour it when it was cooler, damper weather. That's not always an option. So occasionally we will cool the concrete down. over at the TXI plant. They are cooling it down with liquid nitrogen to try to get the temps down a little bit so it won't slough. It'll be able to be finished. One of the things we learned on slipform rail is I think some of the best slipform rail I've ever seen was done at NTTA. This particular installer came in, got new brushes. They're very careful in their brushing technique. It takes a single brush stroke to go from top to bottom, and I think that they end up with something that's every bit as good looking as anything I've ever seen that was cast. We've also talked to them about water being their enemy. If they're going to clean the brush or dampen the brush and go back, they really need to stamp it really hard, have consistent water in the brush. So just one of the lessons that we learned so that we didn't change the color of the concrete. The consistent application of a clear curing compound has really helped us to be able to finish up the job. And we end up with some slipform rail that is really good from the traffic face, very nice in many cases from the field side, and stuff that the workers are very proud of. We also went in and used some organic fiber that we did a mock-up of, and I'll just show you just a couple of quick photos of this. They came in and slip-formed 30 feet of it. If you look carefully in Dennis's hand, you can see that the concrete is pretty fuzzy. And there are organic fibers that have uniformly mixed into the concrete. As we slipped this concrete, the workers told me they couldn't really tell any difference when they were hand finishing it or brushing it, although you could see a little bit of the fibers at the surface. And then we treated this particular 30-foot mock-up just as you would treat everything else. We ended up not pulling any shrinkage cracking out. And on a 30-foot, that was very promising for the 30-foot section because just behind it we have stuff that pulls shrinkage cracking out every 4 to 10 feet or so. And when it's wet or damp, you can really see the cracks. The steel holds it closed, but you can really see the cracks. So we have now completed over 1,000 foot of a large mock-up, I guess you'd call 1,000 foot, using the organic fibers at 1.5 pounds per cubic yard. And again, we did not see any shrinkage cracking in that. Approximately a third of it was done on a retaining wall, a third on pavement, and a third on bridge. We still didn't do that. One of the lessons that we learned was use of color gun, the light spectro, whatever it's called, photometer. And it is something that has helped us a lot to be objective and consistent and accurate. It's very easy to use with about 3 or 4 hours of training and some field time. You're able to go out and use this. Don't read anything to the left, but to the right, if you look at that diagram, you'll see that the color gun bounces a xenon light off the surface of anything, in this case concrete, and describes the color as a function of a three-dimensional solid. So the top is the L dimension, which is white. The bottom L dimension is black. There's an A and a B. The A goes from red to green, the B from yellow to blue. And somewhere in that three-dimensional space is a way to describe that color through the L, the A, and the B. And it really, with a little bit of training, you start to spot these. For instance, you'll change sands, and the sands will give you quite a bit of trouble. Now, some folks will tell you that, you can't do this. What if you do it at night? What happens? Here we are doing a test in the full sun of a sample, one in a full shade under the carport and one in a dark room, and it was within the tolerance of the gun. We had a lot of trust in the gun. The gun can't be used on wet concrete. You're not going to learn anything about wet concrete. This is a great opportunity to take a couple of questions if I got a few minutes. Even though I think that perfect concrete, natural grade concrete, is impossible to achieve, I think that it's something that we should strain and we should try for. I think it's a great way to limit our costs, limit future need for maintenance, and for recoating, giving us a much more sustainable structure. Any questions? That's a good question, and the question is, there doesn't seem to be any consequences for bad concrete. There was plenty of bad concrete. There was an incentive for good concrete, and the consequence for some of the bad concrete was to tear it out. Obviously, in a very large column, and there's a time schedule for, let's say, the toll gantry, you can't do that. So it is incumbent upon the contractor at that point to come up with a repair plan, and we would work with them for how to repair it visually to come up with something that was acceptable. And then the consequence would be to lose their incentive.
What were the organic fibers? And then you mentioned you passed 1,000 linear feet, and I didn't really hear what the practical spacing was.
It's hard to say. The question has to do with the use of organic fibers. Solomon fibers were used, organic cellulose fibers, at 1.5 pounds per cubic yard. The 1,000 feet that we did still doesn't have any cracking in it. Now, I got to be fair with you. We did it in December during some damp weather, and it is probably the prettiest 1,000 foot of rail I've slip formed I've ever been around. Had that been cast in July or August, I'm not sure how that would have looked. but we looked at that as very much a success. And my colleague Leo Felon with TXI says he might change how he feels about organic fiber after some of the work we've done. Good question. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time, y'all.